Good evening, team. Everybody, welcome to Cyber Judo. Really appreciate everyone's time tonight. Tonight is going to be a really interesting discussion as we chit-chat a little bit about the fallout from the MOVEit file transfer ransomware attacks and data breaches that we've been seeing consistently in the news over the last couple weeks now, almost a month. And what we were looking to do was take all the different security incidents that have been going on, the MOVEit vulnerability in itself, Clop, the ransomware gang that's involved, and tie all those elements together to understand a little bit about the background of where the initial vulnerability came from, some of the poor cybersecurity practices that might have led to that vulnerability existing in the first place and then becoming disclosed and exploited. We'll also discuss a little bit about the scope of these data breaches that we've been seeing so far. It's quite interesting in the size, the scope, and the scale. It's almost as if every single business industry and vertical has been impacted. Businesses all the way from small to large, all in the same, being exploited. And we're also going to chit chat a little bit about some of the initial indicators of compromise, being able to detect some of the TTPs that are involved in this exploitation of this particular vulnerability and weakness. And then we're going to also talk about the greater downstream impact to organizations and individuals, because certainly I think this says a lot about some of the considerations that come with supply chain attacks and with third-party risk management, as well as just the general disclosure of information that can lead to greater things like stolen identities and so on. And then we're going to chit chat a little bit here at the end, talking about practical defensive measures that could be implemented in place for organizations, both for those who've been directly impacted by the MOVEit vulnerability, exploit, and some of these data breaches, but also organizations that are looking to, who may not be impacted yet, but are trying to be proactive and be on the bleeding edge of understanding what's going on and securing their defenses. So, all of that noted, I know, Travis, just a little bit earlier, you were saying that you were starting to kind of follow up to what's been going on, particularly around MOVEit. And one of the really kind of quirky elements that we were just chit-chatting about was the vulnerability in itself. So the CVE involved is CVE 2023-3436. And that vulnerability is, ta-da, a SQL injection vulnerability, right?
Nothing really groundbreaking there, huh?
Yeah, nothing particularly novel in that case.
That's been the top of OWASP top 10 for at least 6 or 7 years now, right?
And so that what's better yet is that SQL injection vulnerability leads to remote code execution on systems, and then on top of that, the service account that's used to run the software is by default a local admin. So talk about setting up the pins to knock them down, right, in regards to a vulnerability. Now, what I think we should do is we're going to chit-chat a little bit about the background here, and then I would actually like to talk about using this situation as a learning moment for other organizations of like, well, where could have perhaps the organization behind MOVEit, which is Progressive, and Progressive Software, by the way, just so we're all clear there. But Progressive Software, what they could have done in their software development lifecycle to prevent that vulnerability of being there in the first place. So we'll get into that. But I believe, Travis, when did you start hearing about all this with MOVEit and starting to put the puzzle pieces together?
I heard about it first from a text of a friend of mine who works in security at the VA. And he was like, oh, man, this is a nightmare. And they were patching, and they were actually a really quick agency to deal with it. And they didn't really have any mass impact. But I didn't really follow up. I'm not sure how he was able to, catch on to it that fast. But I mean, that was probably about 2 weeks ago, a little bit before it hit mainstream everything. But then after that, I started hearing about it from some other folks that I knew from the intelligence community, a couple people from the FBI who like, hey, man, you do security now, right? Like, have you heard of this MOVEit bullshit? Have you even heard of this? I'm like, no, I have never heard of this software before. What? And then it started coming in through the news. So like at first it's like, yeah, there are new CVEs all the time. Sorry, your random FTP server, had an issue. But then it became so evident in the news, like, wow, this is huge. This is like log4shell huge. This is everywhere.
Yeah. And one of the things I'm just going to briefly note for everybody is from this discussion, we'll be building a compendium of the what, the where, the when, the how, the why, and then all the specific measures to protect yourself and all that. So as we chit chat and we brainstorm and all that kind of stuff, certainly we'll try to drop some things down in the chat for everybody, but also we'll make sure we have a follow up of a solid compendium and a guide for everybody that essentially, like, I'm like 80% there, but I also want to always make sure I can pick people's brains, make sure I understand every perspective of the dynamic. So really interesting. Usually malicious actors, they love leveraging holidays, right? Because when you have a holiday coming up, that's the perfect time to strike, because there's people out of the office. There are people who are, they get out, they get inebriated real quickly and all of that. And then they get back from Memorial Day weekend or whatever it may be, and everything is on fire. And indeed, that was the pattern here for MOVEit. So initially, according to the CISA and FBI, the ransomware group behind this, everyone's using the term Clop. Clop is more actually referencing is a reference to a ransomware family, so a specific type of software. But for right now, we're just going to use the colloquial term Clop for this ransomware malicious actor group. But the Clop ransomware group started exploiting the vulnerability around Memorial Day weekend, and Progress. They initially published their first advisory about this critical SQL injection vulnerability around May 31st for everybody. So there was this kind of gap period of it being a 0 day. But what's even more interesting is that as the weeks have played out, there's been many other firms who have kind of chimed in on the mix, or in the threat intelligence community, like Gray Noise, as well as Kroll, who have been actually seeing various indicators of compromise and activities that seem to actually indicate that this vulnerability could have been more well known for quite some time. And again, going back as far as to 2021, right? When it comes to this particular exploit, what's really interesting, again, is that it's not just a SQL injection attack vector, but again, it leads directly to arbitrary code execution, which there's been quite a few proof of concepts that have been demonstrated. Actually, what I'll do for everybody is I will drop right in the chat here, I believe, one of the really good proof of concepts that was released by the Horizon 3 AI team. So give me one quick second here, and I think we can drop. There we go. Right here on GitHub, right? So that is a really good proof of concept, again, from the Horizon 3 team. And so even more interesting, again, is that it leads to the access or that the software runs as a local administrator account, specifically provisioned for the MOVEit software. And from there, a malicious actor is able to execute a web shell. Right. So usually the web shells, they're called like human2.asp and whatnot, although they're starting to see that there's additional variants out there in the wild and all that kind of stuff. Travis, Dennis, have you guys heard Clop before? Have you guys heard about any of the things that they've accomplished? Okay, so I'd love to hear it just a little bit, because Travis, what I found interesting was, again, people referring to the ransomware family, right, or the software, right, as if it was the group and whatnot.
That confused me on this one. When I started reading these, I didn't think that term was an APT, right? I didn't think that was a group. I thought that was a classification of a thing, like you were just saying. So I wasn't sure if that was a misconception I had, or a misconception that has just been echoed over and over and over and over and over again in the media.
Yeah, I will say that is always the challenging thing when trying to be really thorough and creating like a compendium of what happened and how it happened, sorting what are the real facts, right, from what people believe the facts are. So notice how, like, when I initially was speaking about this, I was like, believed that it was exploited or started to be exploited Memorial Day weekend, right? Because, you know, being able to really determine the reality of that is a bit challenging because there's just so much data everywhere. But also, to your point, when things get like reposted a billion times by different media and news organizations for just like clickbait, the initial message can kind of be lost in the mix. And so the Clop, quote unquote, Clop ransomware gang is again less of Clop, right? They actually have a specific advanced persistent threat label here. So here, I'm just gonna actually post that here. So they actually have this. These folks are featured on the MITRE attack here. And so these malicious actors, they are Russian linked apparently. Obviously, financially motivated cyber criminal group. Apparently, they've been active since 2014. Fairly significant player in the global crime scene. I've heard of them quite a bit because usually every now and then I've seen it like 2020, 2021, them execute fairly sophisticated campaigns. In the past, they've not just done ransomware as a service, but they've also been a facilitator of being like initial access brokers and that kind of stuff. But what's also kind of interesting is that over the last I want to say 5 years, they've particularly shifted their focus on like what types of businesses and industries that they were interested in, more specifically on universities, hospital systems, manufacturing organizations, with ransomware being their primary modus operandi. So they dabbled a bit in everything for quite some time. This is not a new malicious actor or advanced persistent threat by any means, but they are quite well known for always developing further sophisticated techniques. Now, I know that probably a lot of people come out of this, the news media particularly, saying this was a really sophisticated attack, but it really wasn't. Right? Hilariously enough, actually, the level of sophistication here of being able to detect the SQL injection vulnerability, one could actually go on Shodan, and you can get a list of all of the publicly exposed MOVEit file servers that are impacted, right? So this is, again, not so sophisticated where someone has to reverse engineer something. So far, there's been a lot of different organizations impacted across the board. Dennis, I wanted to get a little bit of your insight. I know that you are less abreast to the day-to-day news. Usually you keep your head down low, focusing on your own reverse engineering and pen testing engagements and ripping those apart in your own awesome way. But what have you heard so far in regards to impacted organizations, governments, individuals, that kind of stuff?
My understanding, from what I have heard, I've heard it's affected quite a few organizations, quite a few top organizations in the U.S., the top 1,000 from what I was told. I also believe there were some government branches that were affected, from my understanding. It doesn't really surprise me too much. So coming from healthcare background, we're very familiar, and you as well, Christian, very familiar with some of these old antiquated systems that some of the healthcare providers have in some cases. And not too far from that is certainly branches of government or large organizations, right? It's very much a case of maintaining legacy compatibility. And in a lot of cases, that also results in the deployment of commercial software with a little bit of a niche use case. I have heard of MOVEit before. So prior to this whole thing, I know, Travis, you said you didn't have too much experience with hearing about MOVEit, but I actually did hear about MOVEit. I've had systems that I'd administered in the past that were covered by Progress Software, not specifically MOVEit, but I do know that's one that they offer. And I was aware of it. So it doesn't, it doesn't throw me too much for a loop, considering that a lot of these softwares are designed to be very compatible for legacy systems like MOVEit, or in my case, iMail was one that I was very familiar with. I am a little bit familiar with some of the cases of the breach, but I don't have too many details about it. I actually was going to look into that a little bit more to see potentially some of the more intricate details of the CVE, but I haven't had a chance to dig too far yet. I know the basics, but I haven't actually gone and looked at the code itself.
You know what's funny is
No,
that
no worries.
everyone's talking about how there's like question was saying how sophisticated the group is, TA505 or whoever it is, but they've been associated with other much more sophisticated things technologically before. Like they've come up with their own 0 days. I mean, they've been associated with attacks that disable Windows Defender through registry edits, right? They have created sophisticated stuff. Comparatively, what the MOVEit exploit actually is, it's just so much more simple than some of the things that this group has already been associated with. So it's fun. It's just it's an odd thing that just because the impact is bigger, it feels more sophisticated.
Yeah, it's that scope there. And
Exactly.
so and by the way, so yeah, Dennis, this is ever evolving. The really interesting thing about this is that this is going to be very much like a SolarWinds Orion, I think, level. Maybe not quite there, but in regards to the compounding impact and cascading impact across organizations, as you kind of look at like the second and third order, right, impacts of what's going on, right? Because as there's a data breach here, right, that's then information that can be leveraged to conduct some other type of set of social engineering attacks across other organizations, individuals, and all that.
And to the point of the SolarWinds attack, it's not just that you're getting access to systems, it's that you're getting access to raw data. I mean, the point of MOVEit was essentially to transfer data back and forth between systems. There's an unimaginable amount of data that you can get from that sort of thing.
100%. So this is what I got here shared up. And so this is, by the way, from my article. Ooh, wow, I like the, it's got like this black border because it's not that white on this other screen. Okay, cool. Well, we'll have to deal with that slight black border, or actually, can I change put us off to the side? It doesn't look that good. Okay. Well, anyways, so what I want to do is talk about some of the organizations affected. So real quick here. This is some of the guide, by the way, that I'm writing that we'll be releasing for everybody soon. So again, this is going to be part of that fantastic compendium. So so far, Clop, their data leak site, so their Clop leaks contains Johns Hopkins University, Putnam Investments, First Source Bank, First National Bankers Bank, National Student Clearinghouse, United Healthcare Student Resources, Leggett and Platt, Shell Gas. Now, there's been some claims about government agencies being affected, state agencies, or federal and state government agencies affected. What's really interesting is Clop has previously noted in the past that they don't try to target governments. And so I'm not necessarily certain of what their entire intent is behind that, but they haven't disclosed specifically their breaches behind the U.S. Department of Energy and the University of Georgia, and also more recently the Louisiana Department of Motor Vehicles. But all these other state and federal agencies, right now, the pattern tends to lead cybersecurity investigators to the fact that these are perpetrated by the malicious actors behind Clop, right? And the malicious actors behind the exploitation of this MOVEit vulnerability. There's been quite a few other organizations that and agencies that have been affected so far that have not been quite listed on the Clop leak site. So BBC, British Airways, Government of Nova Scotia, apparently. So again, this is all like evolving information, but again, what we can see is that it's across the board, all different types of industries and organizations. And again, this is all just what seems to be apparent at this current juncture. All that noted, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I want to talk a little bit about this particular attack and deep diving into it. And so there was this fantastic illustration I came across I thought was really, really helpful in understanding essentially a malicious actor like Clop exploiting the MOVEit vulnerability. So what we got here as you guys can see, some of you folks who might be a little bit more interested in cybersecurity and using it on, using a lot of these tools on the day to day, is this is a Multigo map here, right? One of my most favorite tools. And so, as we have laid out, we have this UNC 4857. They're associated to Clop. So Clop is, again, a ransomware gang there, right? And then some of the other data breaches and exploits and attack campaigns that they've been involved in. So Go Anywhere, Papercut, Acelion, and SolarWinds. Now, there is this interesting pattern if you look at those other campaigns, that those are all other pieces of software that are related to what? File transfers, right? So that's a very interesting pattern, that this malicious actor is obviously quite focused on confidential and sensitive data and exfiltration of that data. And because these are, file transfer software and on infrastructure is going to be performing a lot of file transfers, that means that being able to detect exfiltration of that data might be a little bit more challenging, because the inbound, outbound network communications, right, and the amount of bandwidth that you're saying wouldn't necessarily be too abnormal, right, compared to if you had some regular Windows file server, right, that would just start sending out 15 gigabytes of data all of a sudden to some random IP address on the internet, right? So I did kind of, again, find that to be curious here. As you can see, we got the initial beginning date of May 27th, approximately here, and across the Memorial Day weekend, right? And in this particular attack vector, we can see the web shell, the Lemurloot web shell that essentially is created once the SQL injection vulnerability has been exploited, and there's that arbitrary code execution, very much like that GitHub proof of concept that I dropped down below, right? And then, as you can see, we have some of the associated organizations, again, apparently that have been impacted by the MOVEit hacking campaigns. And then the process of exfiltrating that software. This is the really funny part. So again, it's file transfer software. It has not just SFTP and all that kind of stuff, but they also have HTTP APIs and all that kind of stuff that you can interface with to exfiltrate this data fairly quickly and effectively. So to that, Dennis, as you were saying this, what are your thoughts?
Yes. So I actually I would say, and if I could go back as well, I think Ryan Johnson in chat actually brought up this point. He said, "Why do you think universities like JHU was targeted?" The way that this comes across to me, at least looking at it like this, I almost feel like it could have been a situation where, and it would make sense given their past targets, that they look for systems that are naturally going to be exposed, right? So SFTP transfer servers or any sort of file transfers are generally going to be exposed to the net. Now, you can limit that exposure certain ways, for instance, IP whitelists and things of that nature. But I would suppose in most cases, it's probably a case where these organizations just expose the service on a public IP and anyone in the world can connect. I almost feel like in some of these cases, it was more develop an exploit for a software that is used consistently across the board, and then kind of sweep and look for targets in that way. It wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. I don't know. Now, I don't know the story as much as you do, so I don't know if these are actually specific targets, but part of me wants to say that it's mostly just a scan and see what you find, and then depending on if it looks like it's juicy or not, then leaching into that further. But I could be wrong there.
Yeah, how it usually goes, right? You find the targets of opportunity that are going to bear the most fruit. It's not usually that it's a super specific, industry, super specific company, super specific agency that's being targeted all the time, right? You're going to look at what are your options for this exploit, and then pick the ones that are going to work best for that particular group.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I want to call out to everybody is that the team at Huntress has a really fantastic breakdown about capturing this situation from a specific technical analysis standpoint in regards to the exact TTPs of the malicious actor at this juncture, some of the various indicators of compromise that you can look for on your own systems that are impacted and affected I imagine that at this juncture, anyone who's actually been leveraging and utilizing MOVEit like already knows about it. And one way or another, you either learned about it because you were reading the news and staying abreast to it and you updated it in time, or you learned about it the hard way, right? And there was something funky on your systems, right? When you got back from drinking on Memorial Day weekend, you know? But I saw something that was just really fantastic in this breakdown from the Huntress team. So take a look at this here. So the Huntress team, again, this is just a quick Shodan query, right? That they're running here, right? So for anyone who doesn't know, so Shodan is like it's like the Google, right, for devices connected to the internet. So Google indexes websites and the metadata that exist on the internet, right, so that you can easily search through those and the content that's on each one of those websites. While essentially Shodan is indexing all of the devices that are connected to the internet, what ports they have open, what services are associated to those ports, and what service banners are associated to the rest of that device, right? And so, we can quickly write queries to, find, specific ports that might be open for like MySQL servers that are exposed and all that kind of stuff. But that allows us at scale with this passive analysis tool to do really great research and determine what is this potential impact scope of a vulnerable piece of software that is publicly exposed. So these are all, looks like about 2,500 different instances of MOVEit that's exposed directly to the internet that they were able to index with Shodan in this query here. And now they're obviously not going to go through and like exploit these themselves or go into any proof of concept that. But they have noted that there's been quite a few of these organizations, right, where they've seen a set of the kill chain indicators occur. So again, that's just something that kind of really stood out to me as intriguing and interesting. So definitely a deep dive into the Huntress article is really, really helpful for anyone who's looking to go above and beyond in reverse engineering and understanding this vulnerability and its fundamental components. That all being noted, yeah, Travis?
I've already seen a few different commercial security tools out there that are claiming that they can detect this CVE right away, and it gives me pause because I remember back to when SolarWinds happened and we had the log4shell exploit out there, and every security company out there said that their tool could detect it right away, and so few of them worked in the first few weeks that Gotham Shane made our own, right? That we had to use to make sure that our clients were protected against it. So I wonder, like I hope that the Nessus is out there and the other big mainstream ones that are able to address it can have a very high validity, low false positive, false negative rate on this kind of thing already. But for all the blue teams out there, really got to dig in and make sure you understand the vulnerability to make sure that if it, just because it doesn't pop out on your vulnerability scanner doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah, there's that's a really great note that you make. I will note that compared to something like Log4Shell, which it was the challenge with Log4Shell was that essentially any element of this remote code execution that could be exposed to through web headers, parameters, all that kind of stuff, and down to downstream systems where Log4j is running, then you could exploit that instance of Log4j. So that was a really challenging one because it was like really like wrapped and nested. So you still make a really good point. Luckily, the teams have been pretty good at like initially identifying some of the major indicators of attack and indicators of compromise. And again, that big one, and I'm just going to drop this on the screen for everybody. That big one is seeing essentially this shell here, right? That if you're seeing that shell of the human2.asp or .aspx being present, that's a particular problem. So, there's an element of you could identify this by the detection of the version number of the system, right, or of the software. So if you have the CPE, Common Platform Enumeration, or if you wanted to at scale, right, assuming you have the capabilities of indexing all your web servers and their file systems, right, be searching for this file, right? Be searching for some of the hashes that are also associated to it here. So I would hope that also a lot of the EDR solutions already have the signatures to play for this too. But you can never, to your point, never trust one tool, right? Never trust one layer of defense, right? And I think that this whole situation in itself actually lends back to what we were previously talking about in our last session, which was security and software development lifecycle and DevSecOps, right? And so I know, like last week, we were going through this of like, hey, every element of developing a product or a solution, you should be shoehorning in security controls, right? And we're all on the same page. Like this SQL injection thing is like, wow, it's kind of low hanging fruit, bro, because that means that there was multiple elements of their security and software development lifecycle that must have failed in that process, right? Because you don't just have like the education of your developers and your team, right? But I mean, Dennis, you do a lot of this, but through SAS and DAS analysis, right? You should have the SQL injection vulnerability should have been probably seen, right?
I have a feeling that through manual analysis, it should have been picked up, and especially through automated. SQL injection, in my opinion, is one of the more it's one of the easiest things I think that automated tools can really pick up on. So I would agree with you. I almost have a feeling that they didn't really have too much of a process. I can't speak to the internals of Progress, but I would be very surprised that an automated scan would miss something as relatively simple as a SQL injection.
Yeah. And then on top of that, so yeah, your SAST analysis, so static application security testing. So essentially looking at the code. You have your DAST testing, dynamic application security testing. You can run that through a set of vulnerability tools. And Travis, because you lead a lot of our pen tests, what are your favorite tools for detecting SQL injection vulnerabilities?
Well, there's the classic SQL map, but you're really better off doing that manually most of the time. I mean, you can get some early indicators with like the Burp Suite Pro scanner or the Nessus Web App scanner, but a lot of times they're either going to be they're either false positives or false negatives, really. So manual is still the way to go, unfortunately.
So manual is great for especially if it's like a production environment. But hey, listen, in a dev environment, right? It's not a problem, in my opinion, to beat something down with SQL map.
Oh,
right?
sure, yeah, SQL map all day, yeah.
And then beyond your SAS and DAS analysis, having a pen testing firm come in, right? To your point, now the manual analysis, Travis, right? Usually a third-party penetration testing firm would be quite thorough in trying to pick those types of things up and stomp them out. So
that's a question I've got, right? Like, even if they didn't, pick this up in their own internal SDLC, it's a very widely used software. How did nobody else's pen test ever identify this and report it as a CVE?
I wonder, do they have a bug bounty program? Dennis, do you happen to know if they got a bug bounty program?
Off the top of my head, I don't know, but I completely agree with Travis's point. I was digging through the details on the side here for this exploit, and this is something that I think that most cases would catch it. I mean, it throws a server error if you inject the payload. So I have no idea why. It almost seems like to Travis's point, I don't even know how a pen testing firm wouldn't have caught this. It seems like something that you would have found on the first pass, essentially. Even just simple injection, you put a single quote in there, boom, 500 error. That is an exact indication that something's going on the back end. You can't miss it.
Yeah. To Todd's point here, going back to the basics on a grand scale, would it be interesting to know where the vulnerability would fall on the risk assessment? I think that if you're leveraging a SAS analysis tool like Veracode, that's usually, I've seen Veracode pick up a lot of good SQL injection attack vectors, usually because it's detecting a lack of input sanitization, or it's detecting some set of methods that's almost directly interacting with open SQL statements. And then two is again your DAST analysis, or say SQL map, SQL Ninja, beating that down your product in a development environment with those. That doesn't hurt whatsoever. And then with having a third-party pen testing, and Travis was noting using Burp Suite and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's multiple elements where this I think could have been caught and was unfortunately missed. And certainly this scales as a a critical or high severity vulnerability and risk, right? Just given the likelihood and the impact. And when you compound that with the fact that it's granting access to a service account, right? The move admin on the box by default. So that means that once you get onto that system, right, being able to disable any type of EDR controls that are there, right, any other controls and defensive measures that are on that web server, you can pretty quickly shut down. And one of the challenging things that us in the security community kind of have to tackle with is that there's always going to be a lag time between a malicious actor actually executing an attack versus us being able to detect it and react to the attack as a blue team, because there's just the fact of technology at scale of you're processing thousands of events, right? And depending on the security information event management solution, yeah, you can get a notification in 5 minutes, but in some cases I've seen it, Travis, I mean, we've done purple teaming engagements where it takes like 30 minutes to 60 minutes
Yeah,
for a log to show up in the SIM, right?
Yeah, I'm doing a pretty large scale purple team at the moment, and it's about 40 minutes.
Yeah. So, I think that gives, a malicious actor a fair amount of time, right, to then perform privilege escalation within the rest of the environment, lateral movement throughout the rest of the environment. Obviously, they already have persistence. They got that web shell, right? And so, yeah, there's just so many like double and triple whammies in that regard. So, and then like you've been posting some other fantastic resources with John Hammond here. Tell us a little bit about what John Hammond has in this video.
Oh, he's the same guy that wrote the thing for Huntress. He's part of the Huntress team. He did the proof of concept for this exploit. He's done a lot of deep diving into the reverse engineering of it and all that.
Absolutely love it. So let's talk a little bit about some of the defensive measures that organizations can employ a little bit more. So first and foremost, I continue to see the scale of this growing larger as more organizations identify that they've had a data breach occur, or that they wait to the last second and they're finally their arms twisted to disclose that a data breach occurred. And so now we have kind of a cascading set of scenarios where there's confidential and sensitive information that's being leaked across all these organizations, much of which is associated with individual identities. We got a lot of these apparently state agencies that have been affected, like in Oregon and Louisiana, which could be affecting hundreds of individuals, and again leading to things more identity theft attacks. So let's talk about the organization side first, how organizations can be a little bit more pragmatic for defending themselves, and then I think we could talk about individuals more specifically right after that. So I think first and foremost, even if someone is not directly impacted by MOVEit right now, you should be thinking about, well, what about your vendors and suppliers? Yeah. Are they impacted currently? Because if they've been impacted currently, depending on what data they had exposed, that might involve your firm, right? And that might expose your firm to now greater social engineering attacks, that kind of stuff, right? So there's the usual, like making sure like multi-factor authentication is in place and all that. But I'll also kind of say at this juncture, and I got a whole article that I wrote up on this, I'll post here in the chat in a moment, but I think organizations need to do better than multi-factor authentication now, because it's become fairly straightforward for malicious actors to bypass multi-factor authentication. And Travis, I know that this is a really weird URL, so I'm gonna let you post this one in the chat here. I'll put it in the captions for everybody, but this is, I purposely had the blog article kind of look a little lengthy and esoteric. So this is what it looks like. And now you can see why you should post that in the chat, because it's not like human readable. But this is a whole article about MFA, why it's important, but how malicious actors bypass it using usually a lot of tools like Evil Engine X, which is one of the tools actually we use a lot for our social engineering engagements. And a lot of times it's what we call that and Modlishka. But a lot of these attacks involve a reverse proxy with client domain hooking, right? And so essentially, what you can do in a single channel is present somebody with the real Office 365 website. They put in their actual credentials. It then gives them a real MFA prompt. And really in that process, what you're stealing is not the username and password and the OTP token or anything like that. What you're actually doing is you're stealing their session ID and their session token, right? When you steal the session ID, a session token, and now you can leverage that in your own web browser as a malicious actor being authenticated, right, as that particular user in their account. And so how do you block those types of attacks? Well, first and foremost, people have to move away from using old SMS OTP. That's really, really bad. I mean, it's got its own huge problems with SIM swapping attacks, but also getting rid of regular old school OTP with authenticator apps, right? Putting six-digit codes in, that really just doesn't do it anymore. Because again, malicious actors, they don't even need to do any like reverse proxy with client domain hooking attack or anything like that. They can actually do something as simple as just replaying the username and password and the OTP code that you gave at that moment to log in on your behalf, right?
Yeah, I'm really glad to see that Microsoft's moving towards really strongly encouraging people to do the number matching with additional context and all that. Just it makes it a lot hard. It makes it harder. Not makes it impossible, but it makes it harder for the more rudimentary phishing techniques.
Bingo, right there is not having just the push notification MFA now, but the push notification with the location context, right? And with the reverse number matching is really helpful for protecting organizations. But, how could you even protect that even better? Yeah, you could deploy FIDO2 keys for everyone. Right now, I think that would get a lot of friction from most users at most organizations, understandably so. I would say, though, in the time being, a really good measure is having compensating controls in place for detecting unusual behavior and business email compromise attacks. So when there is a impossible travel login event with a user was in New York, and then all of a sudden there's a login from the California, the user couldn't have traveled that distance within a short period of time. Okay, let's send off a notification to the security team, or better yet, link that to a conditional access policy that just blocks that login outright, until the security team can investigate. So certainly
we've actually got pages on both that additional context MFA and blocking possible travel with conditional access policies on Cyber Judo. I just linked it in the chat.
Very nice, good sir. Much appreciated. So that's I think a major element there. I think that we're going to see quite a large focus on more business email compromise attacks, particularly because people are moving more and more of their traditional infrastructure into platforms like Office 365 and G Suite and all that. So that's where a lot of confidential and sensitive data is starting to live more often for organizations. So that noted, before I take all the good ones and all that, Travis, do you got any specific tips that you want to hit on before we pass a couple over to Dennis?
In terms of avoiding more of those social engineering attacks that are going to come out of this, one of the ones that we see not enough people utilize is domain impersonation controls. It's included in really most, Microsoft 365 licensing. It's a great thing. It's when you can specify domains or even individuals like the VIPs, the executive suite of your organization. And if you've got John Smith at, AOL.com, right? That's your real domain. And then Johnny Smith at AOL.com comes in, it's impersonated, it's gonna get blocked, it's gonna get flagged, right? If someone is trying to typo squat the domain, it gets blocked, it goes to quarantine, it gotta get cleaned up. That also cuts down a lot on some of those different social engineering techniques that are trying to do that next level and do that impersonation. So, and on top of the impossible travel, conditional access policies for authentication, the additional context for MFA, that's an easy thing to implement. That's included in a lot of enterprise licensing, probably by default. You might just not be using it fully, that can really make it harder on the malicious actor or the pen tester.
Awesome. Dennis, do you have any quick ones before I continue on with my whole host of recommendations and thoughts?
I think Travis covered pretty much anything I would say for that. So no, certainly feel free.
Okay. I know that we had a quick comment in the chat, by the way. So it looks like Jason was noting, is there a lab or exercise that you're aware of where you can bring the practicality of these concepts of what you're speaking of? Really good question there. So I know that you're not talking about like building a cybersecurity lab or anything like that. I know we had a whole session on that previously, but more specifically on what those attack vectors we were just talking about. I would say that this is a really fantastic guide here on playing with Evil Engine X2. You can, anyone who is really interested in kind of simulating a couple of these different exercises against their own account, their own Office 365 environment, that kind of stuff, you can get Evil Engine X basically set up and installed and configured and all that in like 15 minutes. And they have some example fishlets for Office 365, for Okta, and a couple other good applications that you can leverage. And then in that process, steal your own session token, right? Being able to replay it, log in, and then what's could be really interesting is when you go to do that, maybe have a virtual machine that's in like, let's say, Azure West Coast and a virtual machine that's in Azure East Coast. Or if you have a VPN solution that you'd like to use, change your VPN over to a different location temporarily, right? And replay your session token over there. And then to take a look at the Microsoft Cloud. So Microsoft, they always change the names on everything because they have like an identity crisis like every other day. But last I knew its name, it was Defender for Cloud Apps, right? And the Defender for Cloud Apps is essentially a CASB solution, right? So Cloud Access Security Broker solution. So, and that would detect that impossible travel. That's where it usually has the impossible travel notifications. So that was a really good question there.
Mentioning the Evil Engine X, we've actually got some folks on the team who have taken the mastery course that's offered, the official courseware from the developer on it, and it's really good. It's a couple $100, a little bit pricey, but if it is something that maybe your organization will sponsor for you, I'll post a link in the chat here. It's very high quality, and it's been working out quite well on engagements.
Awesome. Yeah, certainly. Please drop that in the chat for everybody. So I would say the next big thing here, and this is actually to this LinkedIn user's point, right? I was so happy when I found out with June 1st, my company was not a MOVEit customer. And then 3 seconds later, I started to worry about third parties and nth party and all the vendors. So I always recommend, just like you have an asset inventory of all of your critical systems, right? Being able to identify what major systems you have in place, what type of data are those systems processing, are those systems that you host or someone else hosts? Like, it's always helpful to have that information, but also that same aspect when it comes to your vendors, right? So all your critical vendors, like, who you are using in part of your maybe human resources processes, right? So if you have like a PEO firm, or you have a payroll firm, right? Or you have some type of HR performance provider or something like that, right? Also, it could be third parties that are cloud service providers, third parties that are IT providers, all across the board. Anyone who is processing confidential and sensitive information, you should have an inventory for. And I would say that we're getting just about at the juncture where the thing is, when a security event like this occurs, if you jump on the ball immediately and you bug everybody immediately, they just don't know what they don't know. If you ask somebody, hey, have you been impacted by MOVEit? And they haven't had enough time to pass even identify that maybe they've been compromised, right? Be it directly or indirectly, you're going to get an answer saying, no, we're not impacted by it, right? So the timing of something is a little bit quirky. And obviously, if you wait too long, you waited too long to get insight yourself, right? I always like to kind of say it's akin to when you're trying to anticipate, when you're driving on the road, the car in front of you, and when they're going to stop at the light, and then when they're going to start going, and you try to kind of match their speed and whatnot, but there's always that like lead lag delay, right? I would always say that 2 weeks to 3 weeks into a security incident of like where you hear about this type of stuff on the news is the right time frame of reaching out of, hey, wasn't certain if your firm has already heard about this. There's a lot of news around this right now. Wanted to confirm: does your organization use this software? Do you leverage any software that is from Progress? Or have you had any impacts that have occurred yet, be it directly or indirectly? Want to get some insight there, right? I think that is something that's really important, is to start doing that reach out and inventory that reach out with all the main point of contacts that you have. I would also say that at this juncture, that organizations are going to start to suffer, I think, more when it comes to their employees directly being targeted. So we got all these individuals now with their personally identifiable information out there. Malicious actors, what they love doing is they not just take the data that's from the darknet, but they also match it with data sets that are on the public internet, all the ClearNet data sources, right? All these data brokers who sell your information to, marketing companies and all that kind of stuff. And then they mix that also with usually data from like LinkedIn to establish what, the relationship and hierarchy or sets of relationships and hierarchy that exist within an organization, right? So who your boss is, right? Who answers to you, right? Who leads up the organization. And there's just been this massive increase in like the last 3 years of SMS phishing campaigns, particularly VIP impersonation attacks, right? So you get an email or you get a text message that says, hey, this is John. I want to get this information from you, or hey, can you go do this thing? If people tend to think in the moment and just kind of reply to it, or not really kind of processing through that could be a malicious actor. The problem and challenge with SMS in particular is that SMS doesn't have any email security scanning, right? It's not a corporate managed system. So how do you practically protect your staff members can be a key challenge there. And I would say, and I believe I got actually a fantastic guide that we wrote on Enclave, but I would say that disseminating more education amongst the staff on how they can protect themselves inherently will help improve the security posture of the organization. So give me one quick second here. I'm going to actually pull this off of Enclave right now for you folks. So this way we can have myself and Travis drop that into the chat. Particularly, this is a great guide around protecting yourself from SMS phishing attacks and VIP impersonation attacks. So where is it? Maybe I also put it on the Gotham security site. I tend to syndicate a lot of this fantastic content. I'll have to pull it up here in just a moment. I would also note that there's going to be a more significant increase in employment scam offers, I think, both against employers and against employees, especially because we're in a climate where right now this is more of an employer's market. And there are a lot of folks, unfortunately, that are been laid off and they're looking for jobs. And I think that malicious actors are going to leverage a lot of the information they have on individuals to continue to try to collect as much information as possible by posing as fake employers. I think that you're going to have more malicious actors posing as fake employees. And I think that's what organizations can do is they can disseminate, I think, more knowledge and insight around that. So here, Travis, I'll have you drop this into the LinkedIn chat for everybody, but I'm just going to post it up here briefly. But this is all about combating employer scam offers. So this one here, and I will just briefly share this element. So this is a guide that we wrote up for folks about important tips for job seekers, protecting yourselves in the process of looking for a new job, a new career. Also, really important tips for employers, right? Being able to spot fake employees that are associating themselves to the organization, especially saying like they work at the organization on LinkedIn. By the way, we have tons of like OS or open source intelligence gathering accounts that do that all the time. It's a
Yeah,
great
most of
way
you are
to
probably
protect
friends with
yourself.
them.
Yeah, you're probably friends with them. And then being able to detect homograph phishing attacks, typo squatting domains, brand impersonation domains, and being able to proactively communicate to job seekers, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of great detail in this article that I think is helpful for folks. So,
Christian, Avery in the chat had a great question I think would be good to leave off on tonight. And she
okay.
said, what's the first thing you should do if your data has been compromised as a result of one of these situations? As an
Yes.
individual, not as a corporation, what should your personal checklist be?
Yeah, so that's the other guy that I'm trying to actually pull up right now. And for one reason, I have too many. I got too many guides that I've written, and obviously I am kicking myself in the butt for it. Here it is. I found it. So this is very helpful for protecting yourself from these phishing attacks, and I think a lot of the recommendations here will also apply. So let me share this specific window. And again, I'm going to just share this one out. So this here gives some very, very practical recommendations that you can use across the board. So first and foremost, so people should start using data sanitization services. So Delete Me, OneWrap, those are pretty good solutions. But I want to say my favorite solution so far that I've been deploying for myself and for my family. And by the way, I'm not sponsored or anything like that. And I actually have been just leveraging a solution and I don't want to be sponsored, but I've been using Aurora. So Aurora has a pretty good platform for doing data sanitization, doing credit reporting, monitoring your bank accounts, also having personal identity theft insurance bundled in. They have a NAV solution that's kind of all right, whatnot, but it's at least centralized for you being able to see the rest of your family members, which is pretty cool. They have their own pseudo VPN solution, although I'm not one of those types of people who I usually promote using VPNs all the time. Like you should use NordVPN; it's going to protect you. Like that's a controversial thing in my
Hey,
mind.
you get
But
sponsored though.
yeah, tell me about it. All right, and then also it has a built-in, for most people, um, remembering passwords is a bad idea, right? For layman's and all that kind of stuff. And so I would usually, for most folks, suggest using a password manager. So Aurora also has a password manager there. And let me do this. I'm going to unshare my screen. Let me just pull up in their link. But again, so I've been leveraging these guys. Actually, wow, it's Aurora.com. Wow, that's simple. So I'm gonna just post that here. So yeah, Aurora.com, and their services so far have been really, really effective and monitoring the bank accounts, monitoring credit reporting, monitoring dark web monitoring is a controversial thing too, because most of these dark web monitors, right, they have questionable efficacy because usually a lot of malicious actors are going to be selling data on restricted forums that you usually have to get access to invite only, right? And again, it's being specifically sold for something like the Clop attacks. They have a leak site where they're posting a lot of this information. So a lot of these darknet monitors will pick up, I think, on some of that data, and that'll be very helpful. And again, they got the credit monitoring, the VPN, the antivirus, and the passwords, and the password management. So I would say that if that was going to be an initial step, that step, and then getting all your family members set up too, right? Not just protecting yourself, but I think that your parents, your kids, all that kind of stuff is really helpful. Outside of that, I have one last guide that I can share for folks if they believe that they've been compromised, or you believe that you've been a victim of a identity theft attack, or are indeed a victim of identity theft attack. So we have a whole guide that we wrote about the steps and measures of going through basically identity theft recovery. So I'm just gonna again post this hyperlink for everybody to take a gander at. But some of the practical things here. Some of the practical things in this guide that both, not just myself, but actually Blake created here. So beyond the changing passwords, specific authorities to reach out to. So we index all of the major areas in which you can report any types of claims, what's occurred, monitoring and freezing your credit, considering various things like home title insurance and protecting your cards. Oh, I always want to just say this. This is a really cool tip and trick. So many people use their own credit cards and debit cards to purchase weird things on the internet all the time. I never trust one single merchant. Privacy.com has got a fantastic service that's completely free that allows you to provision virtual credit cards, right? Or debit card numbers that have a very specific amount that can only be used by one merchant. So that's really, really helpful for when a merchant gets compromised and there's a credit card out there or something like that. It's like, well, that's not a big deal because that credit card can't be charged by any other merchant. It's tied to that specific merchant's ID, right? So I will say, if you want to be more preventative of at least having your financial information being leaked out there, right? Use a service like privacy.com. Again, it's free. The way they monetize everything is through all the fees that they get from the merchant service providers. And then we talk a little bit about what's the process for obtaining a new social security number. If someone actually really needs to do that, but there's still a lot of considerations involved in that process that can make it a pain in the butt. So that was a really good question there.
I think one of the best resources that Christian and Blake have put out there, not just because of how practical it is, but like when you're in a situation where you need to check on what to do when your identity is stolen, you need it now, right? So this bookmark, this link I just put in the LinkedIn chat and send it to your parents. I've sent it to my parents like 25 times because they get in data breaches every 2 weeks. So make sure you've got that information handy before you need it.
Fantastic note there. And I love the additional pizzazz that you put on that. So to that, Travis, Dennis, did I miss anything? And from your guys' own perspective on, as an individual, how you would react to protecting yourself, protecting your family members, that kind of stuff that maybe we didn't quite hit on?
The only thing I would say is if you don't already have identity theft insurance, you should buy it today. It's not expensive at all. You should buy it today.
That I previously used LifeLock, but when I moved over to Aurora, I found it to be cheaper and getting way more stuff, and they got the insurance with it too. It's really, really cool.
I use Xander Insurance. It's like $11 a month for my whole family.
Nice.
There's no reason not to have it.
Dennis, do you got anything that we missed in regards to, for specific individuals, how to react to the situation and all that?
I would say identity protection is definitely one of them. I would maybe say just keep a light monitor on news that comes out from this. I'm sure there's probably going to be fallout as the effects of this compromise cascade. So just to keep a little bit of an eye on the news. And Christian, I think you forgot your referral codes for all the links you posted in chat there.
Right? Well, okay. So first off, it's mostly self-promotion of articles that we've written in the past, but you're right about the referral code for at least Aurora, right? It's like, here's a hyperlink here, here's a hyperlink here. And to your point, for everyone who is watching with us tonight, I will be following up with a compendium of the who, what, where, when, why, and how of the MOVEit vulnerability, all the hacks that have been associated up to this point, and then all these practical recommendations that we've been providing for both organizations and individuals. So you have it all in one place. To Travis's, again, point, when things are hitting the fan, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of noise. Sometimes you just need one source with everything together and just a quick checklist to kind of hit through for things, right? So certainly follow us on LinkedIn, guys. You guys will be seeing that in the next day or so here. And I believe we've hit on all the really good stuff. I'm looking forward to next week. I believe next week we are going to be talking a little bit about web application pen testing. So, Dennis, we'll have you as well as Mr. Holman be chit-chatting quite a bit about that. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Stay in touch. Have a good one. Bye now.